The cuffs were already on before Marcus Hale knew what hit him. No questions, no warnings, just the snap of cold steel and the bark of an order that wasn't up for discussion. "Step away from the property!" Officer Blake Carson's voice cracked through the warm evening air like a gunshot. His partner, Dana Myers, was already circling wide, one hand brushing the grip of her service weapon, eyes sweeping Marcus from head to toe as if being here was a crime in itself. "This is my home," Marcus said evenly, the weight of each word deliberate. His SUV still hummed behind him, taillights bleeding red across the driveway. It didn't matter. Carson's eyes weren't built to recognize ownership when the man in front of him didn't fit the picture in his head. From the far sidewalk, Linda Perez's voice rang out, sharp and urgent. "That's his house! He lives there!" Her phone was already up, recording. Red and blue lights strobed across her face, catching the tight knot of anger between her brows. Carson ignored her. His radio crackled. Possible burglary suspect in custody. And just like that, Marcus Hale, federal agent sworn to protect the Constitution, had been reduced to a line item in a wrongful arrest, another number in the long shadow of racial profiling. He didn't resist. That wasn't how you won these battles. Stillness was its own kind of weapon, and Marcus knew how to use it. But stillness didn't stop Myers from rifling through his pockets. It didn't stop Carson from taking the keys out of his hand like they belonged to him. The scent of hot rubber and summer dust hung heavy in the air. Every sound felt magnified, the clink of the cuffs, the scuff of boots on concrete, the low hum of the cruiser's engine. Somewhere in that noise, Marcus caught the faint hiss of an online stream taking off, voices in the comments already arguing about police misconduct, about race, about the line between safety and abuse of power. Carson pulled him toward the cruiser, gripped tight. "You can explain yourself at the station." But Marcus didn't look at him. He was looking past him, at the corner where any second now a black SUV with federal plates would turn in and the real story would begin. They thought they were in control. They had no idea they'd just arrested the man who'd come back from months undercover with the power to dismantle their entire department. Marcus Hale had learned long ago that silence could be louder than shouting, and right now, in the chokehold of flashing lights, that silence was his sharpest blade. He let Carson steer him toward the cruiser, every step deliberate, every glance fixed forward. He didn't need to look around to know the scene was growing an audience. The faint shimmer of phone screens glinted at the edge of his vision, neighbors leaning out from porches, their whispers threading into the warm night air. He caught a few words: trespassing, arrest. Why's he here? But didn't bother to answer them. The answer would come soon enough, and when it did, it wouldn't need defending. Carson's grip on his arm was too tight for someone who claimed procedure. Myers moved like a shadow, not breaking eye contact with the SUV parked in the driveway. Her gaze swept over the tinted windows, the clean shine, the government plate bracket that she didn't seem to register. Instead, she radioed in, asking for a secondary unit to respond, her tone low but pointed, like she was warning a partner in a card game about a bluff. Frank Dorsey's voice wasn't on the street, but Marcus could almost hear him in the background, imagining the 911 call. "There's a suspicious guy in my neighbor's driveway. Dark SUV, black male, mid to late 30s. Looks like he's about to break in." It wouldn't have taken much to convince dispatch, not here, not in a neighborhood like this, the kind where the lawns were perfect, the blinds moved only when people thought they weren't being watched, and the local crime rate was more rumor than reality, the kind where a stranger was anyone who didn't belong, and belonging had less to do with property deeds than skin tone. Myers moved toward the SUV, pulling on gloves. "Vehicle search," she told Carson, who gave a curt nod. Marcus almost smiled. They thought this was the moment they'd find their proof. Some scrap of justification to turn a wrongful arrest into a good collar. She popped the rear hatch. The smell of leather and paper slipped into the air. Inside was a duffel bag, locked with a coded clasp. She glanced back at Carson. "Locked," she said. Carson looked over his shoulder at Marcus. Combination? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Myers pulled a small pry tool from her belt and started working the clasp. The lock gave after a few quick twists. She unzipped the bag and froze for half a second, just long enough for Marcus to see the flicker in her eyes. Files. Not the kind you print off at a public library. Heavy cardstock folders stamped with red lettering. Confidential, federal use only. Each one was marked with the seal of the United States Department of Justice. Myers reached in, holding one up like it was radioactive. "What's this?" she asked. Carson took the file, turning it over, scanning the first page, his eyes narrowing. "Where'd you get this?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his voice as even as it had been from the start. "Work." That one word landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. But Carson either didn't hear the warning in it or didn't care. "We'll figure it out downtown," he said. The radio crackled again, a dispatcher confirming, "No outstanding warrants, but subject file returns as restricted." Myers frowned. "Restricted?" Carson didn't answer. He was too busy slamming the duffel shut, as if closing it would erase what they'd just seen. Carson didn't like questions he couldn't answer, and the word restricted was one of them. It hung there in the sticky air between the strobe of red and blue, making him glance at Myers like they were suddenly playing in a league they hadn't signed up for. But pride is a stubborn thing. "Load him up," Carson said, pushing Marcus toward the rear door of the cruiser. The cuffs cut deeper into Marcus's wrists, but his expression didn't change. He slid into the back seat like a man boarding a train he'd chosen, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror where Carson's face looked sharper in the fractured light. Myers lingered by the SUV, almost pretending she hadn't heard the dispatcher's tone. She scanned the driveway, then the front door of the house, a clean white facade with a brass number plate, no sign of forced entry, no broken lock. If this had been about actual burglary, it would already be over. But it wasn't. This was about something else. Something uglier. From across the street, Linda Perez stepped off the curb, her phone still filming. "You're making a mistake," she called, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Carson turned on her like a guard dog, one hand lifting toward his belt. "Ma'am, step back, or I'll have you detained for obstruction." Linda froze, but her phone didn't. The camera lens caught his words, the threat, the puff of authority that would look very different when played back in a viral video. Inside the cruiser, Marcus sat still, letting his senses stretch. He could feel the thin pulse of the police radio through the seat, hear the muffled chatter of other units in the area. Somewhere in the stream of noise was a code for a supervisor en route, which meant they'd just pulled a higher-ranking officer into this. That could work either way, tighten the net or rip it apart. He knew which way it would go, but they didn't. Carson slid into the driver's seat, Myers into the passenger seat. The engine coughed to life, headlights throwing long shadows down the street. As they rolled forward, Marcus turned his head slightly toward the mesh partition. "You ever think about what happens when you arrest the wrong person?" he asked. Carson's jaw tightened. "You don't look like the right one," he said flatly. It wasn't a joke, but it landed like one, and not in Carson's favor. They didn't get far. A set of headlights appeared at the opposite end of the block, low and steady, moving like they belonged here. The vehicle was a black SUV, a newer model, its government plates catching the cruiser's beams just long enough for Carson's grip on the wheel to shift. Myers noticed, too. "You expecting somebody?" she asked. Carson didn't answer. The SUV stopped nose to nose with their car, blocking the street completely. The driver's door swung open, and the man who stepped out didn't need a badge in his hand to announce who he was. Marcus knew him instantly. Assistant Director Samuel Keaton. Tall, silver at the temples, coat open over a tailored suit. He walked like the asphalt belonged to him. Carson cracked his door half standing. Sir, we're in the middle of... Keaton cut him off with a look sharp enough to stop blood flow. Step out of the vehicle, Keaton ordered. His tone was calm, but there was no room for negotiation. Carson hesitated. Release Special Agent Hale. Now. The street went quiet except for the idling engines and the faint buzz of Linda Perez's live stream, still going, still catching every frame. Keaton didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked from Carson to Myers, then to the cruiser where Marcus sat watching. You two just made the kind of mistake that writes itself into federal reports, Keaton said, and I'm here to collect the first page. That was the moment Marcus knew the night was about to turn. Not because he was free, he'd known that would happen eventually, but because now, the investigation wasn't his alone. It had just gone public, had just gone. Myers stepped closer, dangling a set of keys. We're going inside to make sure nothing's been disturbed. Marcus's voice sharpened. That's federally protected property. You cross that threshold without clearance, you'll be breaking federal law. She hesitated, but the watch commander's nod sent her toward the door anyway. A third officer approached Carson with a printout from the in-car terminal. Ran the subject through the system. No warrants, but his files restricted. The word hung in the air. Restricted meant untouchable information, sealed records, federal clearance. It made the silence thicker, but instead of backing off, Carson's suspicion deepened. Keaton turned to the watch commander. Do you understand what you've just done? His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs of the crowd. You detained a federal agent on his own property without probable cause. You attempted to search federally protected premises without a warrant. And you broadcast an inaccurate arrest code into your department's system. That is more than bad policing. That is a civil rights violation and a direct interference in an active federal operation. The watch commander's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The two agents from the Suburban stepped forward, one holding a sealed case. Marcus's black duffel bag returned to its owner without a word. The other agent lingered near Carson and Myers, close enough to make their discomfort visible to every camera trained on the scene. Linda's live stream caught everything. The close-up of Keaton's face as he spoke, the visible shift in body language from the officers, the ripple of realization in the gathered neighbors. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. Racial profiling, police misconduct, wrongful arrest. The kind of words that didn't fade quietly once they hit the public record. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but steady, directed at no one and everyone. I asked you if you knew what probable cause meant. Tonight you proved you don't. Carson flinched at the line, his authority shrinking under the weight of eyes, both in person and virtual, watching it happen. Keaton extended his hand toward Carson and Myers. Badges, weapons, credentials, now! Myers unhooked her duty belt with hands that trembled just enough to be noticed, setting her sidearm and badge in his palm. Carson hesitated, the refusal visible in the set of his shoulders, but Keaton's gaze didn't leave him until the metal and leather rested in the same hand. The sound of the sidearm hitting the other gear was louder than any word spoken. The watch commander opened his mouth to protest, but Keaton cut him off with the precision of a gavel. Save it for your attorney. This scene is now under federal jurisdiction. All evidence, all recordings, all witness statements will be turned over to my office immediately. From the far curb, the journalist's camera zoomed in on Marcus, the faintest shift in his eyes revealing that this exact outcome, was the reason he hadn't resisted from the first moment. He'd known what was coming, and now so did everyone else. Keaton's words had cleared the air, but Marcus knew that clearing the air wasn't the same as closing the case. He stepped forward, the red-blue haze from the idle cruisers flickering across his face. The street was still, too still, and every phone camera was pointed at him. This was no longer just about the wrongful arrest. This was about making the aftermath impossible to bury. I'm invoking federal authority to secure all digital evidence from this incident, Marcus said, his tone clipped, surgical. His gaze swept the line of onlookers. That means every video, every live stream, every photo taken tonight will be collected as part of an official civil rights investigation. The words hit harder than a raised voice ever could. People started lowering their phones, not to hide them, but because they were suddenly part of something much bigger. Linda, still alive, held hers steady. "You'll have my file by morning," she said, her voice loud enough for the stream to catch. Keaton gestured to the agents. They moved with the precision of clockwork, approaching the watch commander first. "We'll need your bodycam footage now," one agent said. The man's lips tightened, but he unclipped the device and handed it over. Carson and Myers followed, their motions mechanical, their faces pale in the glare of the headlights. Each camera was sealed into an evidence bag and marked before being passed back to the Suburban. Marcus walked toward his SUV, the duffel bag now resting safely in the back seat. He paused, turning back to the line of officers. "I've spent the last 6 months investigating this department for patterns of racial profiling and abuse of power," he said, each word deliberate. "Tonight you handed me the most public example I could ask for." A ripple moved through the crowd, the truth cutting through the speculation. "This isn't ending with an apology or a memo. This will be in the federal record, and it will be in the public record. You've turned a neighborhood call into a nationwide case study in police misconduct." The journalist on the curb lowered his camera just long enough to glance at Marcus. "You're going to take this to the Hill, aren't you?" Marcus didn't smile, but his silence was answer enough. Keaton stepped in beside him, his voice low but meant to carry. "We'll start with the Civil Rights Division, then the Oversight Committee. And before this month is over, this department will be under a federal consent decree." The words were for the officers, but the audience wasn't just them. It was every viewer watching Linda's feed, every reporter already framing their headline. A single clap echoed from somewhere in the back of the crowd. Then another, and another. It wasn't applause for drama. It was the sound of neighbors realizing the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Marcus opened the SUV's driver door, resting one hand on the frame. "Next time," he said, locking eyes with Carson, "remember that the man you're cuffing might be the one writing your last performance review." He got in, started the engine, and pulled away slowly, the Suburban falling in behind him. The scene didn't end when he turned the corner. The story was already moving faster than either car could drive, pushed forward by every phone that had been filming. By morning, Marcus knew the footage wouldn't just be trending, it would be unavoidable. And when the subpoenas started landing on desks across the city, no one involved tonight would be able to say they didn't see it coming. The neighborhood was quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that felt staged, like everyone had agreed to stay inside and let the night before speak for itself. Marcus stood at his kitchen counter, coffee cooling in his hand, the blinds half drawn. Across the street, Linda Perez's porch light was still on. She'd been up all night, editing the raw footage before sending the entire file to Keaton's secure drop. Her video had already cleared 3 million views. On the muted TV in the corner, every network carried the same clip. Carson's hand hovering over his weapon, Myers digging into the duffel bag, Keaton's voice cutting through the night like a verdict. The chyron under the footage read, "FBI agent arrested at his own home, civil rights investigation launched." It was the kind of headline that forced even the most indifferent viewer to stop and think. Marcus wasn't smiling. This wasn't about vindication. This was about proof, tangible, undeniable proof that racial profiling and abuse of authority weren't abstract debates, but lived experiences. And now, they had a timestamp, a location, and a chain of custody that no one could spin. His phone buzzed. A message from Keaton. "Civil Rights Division drafting consent decree. DOJ press conference at 4. You should be there." Marcus set the coffee down, staring at the screen for a long moment before replying, "I will." He thought about the people who'd watched it unfold in real time, the neighbors who'd hesitated, the ones who'd filmed, the strangers across the country who would see the replay and recognize pieces of their own story in it. Justice wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a slow burn, lit in moments exactly like this, when the lie that it couldn't happen here was dragged into the light. Before heading out, Marcus stepped onto his porch. The street was empty, but he spoke aloud anyway, his voice steady in the morning air. Home should be the one place you never have to prove you belong, and until that's true for everyone, none of us is done. He locked the door, the brass numbers above it catching the sun, and walked to his SUV. Today wasn't about him. It was about making sure that next time there wouldn't need to be a camera, a live stream, and a federal convoy to keep the law from breaking itself.